A 31-year-old environmental lawyer boards what she thinks is a commercial flight to Denver for the most important case of her career, only to discover the airline overbooked and rerouted her to a stranger's private jet. He's a 38-year-old tech billionaire with piercing blue eyes and a reputation for being ruthless in business. She's mortified to be the charity case invading his space, expecting cold tolerance at best. Instead, he offers her the window seat, asks about her work, with genuine curiosity, and by the time they land 3 hours later, has treated her with more respect and care than anyone in her entire professional life. She tells herself it was just kindness between strangers. But 4 years later, they're standing at an altar with 300 guests, and 3 years after that, they have 3 children who will someday hear the story of how Mom and Dad met at 30,000 feet. This story has a lawyer who fights for clean water access and a billionaire who built an empire on sustainable technology, discovering they've been working toward the same mission from different angles. A chance encounter that becomes an email correspondence, that becomes coffee meetings, that becomes the kind of love that moves mountains. A man who's never met anyone who challenged his assumptions until her. A woman who's never met anyone who saw her brilliance as something to celebrate rather than compete with. 4 years of building friendship into foundation before building foundation into forever. And an ending that proves the best love stories aren't about love at first sight, but about respect at first conversation, growing into something neither of them can imagine living without. What happens when you're forced into proximity with someone who sees you, really sees you, for exactly who you are? Subscribe now, because this is the story that proves the most extraordinary journeys begin with unexpected turbulence, and the best marriages are built on years of genuine friendship first. Don't miss how one diverted flight, one act of unexpected kindness, and 4 years of falling slowly becomes a lifetime of 3 kids, shared mission, and the kind of partnership that changes not just 2 lives, but the world they're determined to make better. Emma Kaplan had exactly 47 minutes to catch her connecting flight to Denver when she discovered the universe had other plans. Standing at the customer service desk at Boston's Logan Airport, she watched the gate agent's sympathetic expression with growing dread. Outside the terminal windows, March rain hammered against the glass, turning the tarmac into a sheet of reflecting puddles. "I'm very sorry, Ms. Kaplan," the agent said, her fingers flying across her keyboard. "The severe weather caused cascading delays. Your original flight was oversold, and with the missed connection, we don't have another seat to Denver until tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow morning?" Emma's voice came out higher than intended. She forced herself to breathe, to stay professional. "I have a court appearance at 9 a.m. I'm representing 3 communities in a clean water lawsuit against the industrial manufacturer. If I'm not there—" "I understand the urgency," the agent interrupted gently, "but I'm showing the same situation on every carrier. Weather's shut down half the routes into Denver." She paused, glancing at something on her screen. "Wait, there might be— let me check something." Emma's hands gripped the edge of the counter. She'd spent 8 months preparing for this case. 8 months documenting contamination, interviewing families whose children had elevated lead levels, building an argument that could force real change. Missing tomorrow's hearing wasn't an option. The agent made a phone call, spoke in low tones, then hung up with an expression Emma couldn't quite read. "Okay, this is unusual, but I may have a solution. There's a private aircraft scheduled to depart for Denver in 90 minutes. The passenger has agreed to allow you to share the flight." Emma blinked. "A private aircraft?" "Yes. The owner was informed of your situation and has offered the extra seat. There's no charge. He's already making the trip. It's entirely up to you, but it would get you to Denver by 8 p.m. local time." A private jet, with a complete stranger. Every instinct in Emma's body screamed that this was either too good to be true or somehow inappropriate. She didn't accept charity. She'd built her entire career on working twice as hard as everyone else, on never owing anyone anything. But 3 communities were counting on her. Families who couldn't afford to wait another day for justice. "What's the passenger's name?" Emma asked carefully. The agent checked her screen. "Dominic Chen. I know who he is." Emma's stomach dropped. Everyone knew who Dominic Chen was. Tech billionaire, founder and CEO of Helix Solutions, the company that had revolutionized renewable energy storage. Forbes 30 under 30, then 40 under 40. Known for being brilliant, demanding, and completely uninterested in the typical Silicon Valley social scene. And she was supposed to share his private jet for 3 hours? "Ms. Kaplan?" the agent prompted. "The car is waiting to take you to the private terminal, but I need an answer." Emma thought of the families in Riverside, Colorado. Thought of Maria Gonzalez showing her the rash on her daughter's arms from contaminated bathing water. Thought of the manufacturer's lawyers who'd tried every tactic to delay this hearing. "I'll go," she said. "Thank you." 20 minutes later, Emma stood in the private aviation terminal, a world away from the chaos of the main airport. The space was quiet, luxurious, filled with leather furniture and soft lighting. Through the windows, she could see a sleek white jet on the tarmac, rain streaming off its wings. "Ms. Kaplan?" She turned to find a man in his late 30s approaching. He was tall, probably 6'2", with dark hair, sharp cheekbones, and the kind of intense blue eyes that seemed to see right through polite pretenses. He wore dark jeans, a gray cashmere sweater, and carried himself with the unconscious confidence of someone who'd built an empire before turning 40. Dominic Chen, in person, about to share his private jet with her. "Mr. Chen," Emma said, extending her hand professionally, "I can't thank you enough for this. I know it's an enormous imposition." "It's not an imposition." His handshake was firm, brief. The plane was going to Denver anyway. You needed a seat. It's logistics, not charity. The way he said it, matter of fact, without any of the self-congratulatory warmth she'd expected, made something in Emma's chest loosen slightly. "Still, I'm grateful, and I promise to stay out of your way during the flight." Something flickered in his expression. Amusement, maybe? "It's a 3-hour flight, Ms. Kaplan. I think we can, manage to share the space without you needing to make yourself invisible." A crew member appeared to take her bag. Dominic gestured toward the tarmac door. "Shall we? I understand you have an important hearing tomorrow." Emma fell into step beside him as they walked toward the jet. Rain misted across her face, and she caught the scent of jet fuel and wet concrete. "The airline mentioned your case when they asked if I'd share the flight," Dominic said. "Clean water access lawsuit in Colorado. Riverside, Clearmont, and Henderson communities against Apex Industrial." Emma stopped walking, surprised he knew the details. "You're familiar with the case?" "I read the news. Apex has been dumping heavy metals into groundwater for years. Your filing last fall was the first time anyone's managed to get past their legal barriers to an actual hearing." He held her gaze. "I hope you destroy them tomorrow." The vehemence in his voice caught her off guard. This wasn't polite interest. This was personal investment. "I plan to," Emma said quietly. "Those families deserve clean water, deserve safety, deserve someone fighting for them who won't back down." "Good." Dominic nodded toward the jet stairs. "Then let's make sure you get there." The interior of the jet was unlike anything Emma had ever seen. Cream leather seats that looked more like armchairs, polished wood surfaces, soft ambient lighting. It seated maybe 8 people, but right now it was just the 2 of them and the flight crew. "Please take the window seat," Dominic said, gesturing to the starboard side. "Better view, and you'll want to see the Rockies on approach." "Are you sure? It's your plane, which means I can sit wherever I want, and I want you to be comfortable." He said it simply, without any underlying expectation, and somehow that made it harder to refuse. Emma settled into the window seat, and Dominic took the one across the aisle, close enough for conversation, far enough to not feel intrusive. The crew went through safety procedures, and within minutes they were taxiing toward the runway. As the jet lifted into the air, banking over Boston Harbor, Emma felt the tension she'd been carrying all day start to ease. She was going to make it. She was going to be there for those families. "Tell me about the case," Dominic said once they'd leveled off. "If you're comfortable sharing. I'm curious about the legal strategy." Emma glanced at him, trying to gauge whether this was polite conversation or genuine interest. His expression was attentive, focused, the same look she'd seen in photos of him at tech conferences. "The challenge with Apex is they've hidden behind corporate restructuring," she began. "Every time we'd get close to establishing liability, they'd spin off a subsidiary, declare bankruptcy on the polluting entity, and emerge clean while the contamination continued." "Shell game," Dominic said. "Make the problem someone else's responsibility until there's no one left to hold accountable." "Exactly. So our strategy is piercing the corporate veil, proving the parent company exercised enough control over operations that they can't hide behind the subsidiary structure. We have internal emails showing the CEO knew about the contamination. We have engineering reports they suppressed. We have 7 years of documented health impacts in 3 communities. Dominic leaned forward slightly. "What's your biggest vulnerability? What will their lawyers attack?" It was the kind of question her co-counsel would ask, the kind of strategic thinking that separated good lawyers from great ones. "Causation," Emma admitted. "They'll argue we can't definitively prove their specific discharge caused the specific health outcomes, that there could be other environmental factors. That correlation isn't causation. But you have the internal documents showing they knew. We do, which is why I think we can win. Knowledge of harm plus continuation of harmful activity equals negligence, at minimum. Recklessness at best. And recklessness opens the door to punitive damages." Dominic smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face. "You're going to eviscerate them." "That's the plan." They talked for the next hour. About the case, yes, but also about the broader issues of environmental justice, about communities that bore the costs of industrial pollution while corporations reaped the profits. Dominic asked sharp questions, made observations that showed he understood not just the legal issues, but the human ones. "I grew up in a town like that," he said at one point. The crew had brought dinner, some kind of elegant chicken dish that Emma barely tasted because the conversation was too engaging. Not contaminated water, but a tech manufacturing plant that released God knows what into the air. Everyone in town worked there or knew someone who did, so no one wanted to ask questions about the cancer rates. Did anyone ever hold them accountable? No. The plant closed. When I was in high school, moved operations overseas. Left behind a Superfund site and a lot of people with medical bills. He paused. "That's why I started Helix. I wanted to prove you could build sustainable technology without exporting the costs to vulnerable communities." Emma set down her fork, really looking at him. "I've read about your company, the battery storage systems, but I didn't realize that was the motivation. Most people don't. They see the valuation, the revenue growth, the Wall Street coverage. They don't ask why someone would spend 15 years perfecting energy storage when there were faster paths to profit." He met her eyes. "But it matters. The why behind the work. I think you understand that." "I do." Emma felt something shift in her chest, a recognition maybe, of finding someone who got it, who understood that work could be about more than career advancement or financial success, that sometimes you chose the harder path because it was the right one. They talked until the sun set, painting the clouds outside Emma's window in shades of orange and pink. Talked about their families, his parents who'd immigrated from Taiwan and built a restaurant in Sacramento, her father who'd been a union organizer in Detroit before he died, about the paths that led them to their current work, about the loneliness of doing work you believed in when it seemed like everyone else was optimizing for different values. Can I ask you something? Dominic said as they crossed into Colorado airspace, the Rockies emerging in the distance like jagged purple shadows. Of course. Why environmental law? You could have gone corporate, made 10 times the salary, worked on mergers instead of contaminated groundwater. Emma had been asked this question before, usually by law school classmates who'd made exactly that choice. But somehow from Dominic it felt different, like he actually wanted to understand, not judge. Because I couldn't sleep at night, she said, honestly. I tried. Did a summer associate position at a big firm in New York. Did research for an oil company merger. Made more money in 10 weeks than my mom made in a year. And every night I'd lie awake thinking about the people affected by these deals. The workers who'd lose jobs. The communities that would lose tax base. I couldn't reconcile the work with who I wanted to be. So you chose meaning over money. I chose being able to look at myself in the mirror. The money would have been nice, Emma admitted with a slight smile. But I like who I am when I'm fighting for families in Riverside. I wouldn't like who I'd be defending Apex. Dominic was quiet for a long moment, his gaze on the darkening landscape outside. When he spoke, his voice was soft. I wish more people thought like you. I wish more people had the privilege to, Emma countered. I can do this work because I don't have kids to support, because I'm healthy, because I got scholarships for law school. Not everyone has those options. Which is why the people who do have options have a responsibility to use them well. He turned back to her. You're doing that. It matters. The sincerity in his voice made Emma's throat tight. She'd spent so many years justifying her choices to skeptical colleagues, to law school friends who thought she was wasting her potential. Having someone see the value without her having to defend it felt like a gift. Thank you, she said quietly. That means more than you. No. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, announcing their descent into Denver. Emma watched the city lights spread below them like a carpet of stars, the Rockies' dark silhouettes against the western sky. As the jet touched down smoothly at the private terminal, Emma felt a strange reluctance for the flight to end. These 3 hours had been unexpected in every way, not just the transportation, but the connection. The feeling of being genuinely seen and understood by someone who had no reason to care about her work or her life. The jet taxied to a stop. The crew opened the door, and cool Colorado air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine and altitude. Thank you again, Emma said as she stood, gathering her bag. Not just for the flight, but for the conversation, for understanding why this work matters. Dominic stood as well, and in the close quarters of the jet cabin, Emma was suddenly aware of how tall he was, how intent his gaze. Can I ask one more thing? He said. Of course. After your hearing tomorrow, if you have time, would you let me buy you dinner? I'd like to hear how it goes, and I'd like to continue this conversation. Emma's heart did something complicated. This was just networking, she told herself. Just two professionals who'd had an interesting discussion and wanted to maintain the connection. But the way he was looking at her didn't feel purely professional, and the way her pulse was racing definitely wasn't. I'd like that, she heard herself say. But only if you let me buy dinner. You gave me the flight. Dinner's on me. Dominic smiled, that transformative smile again. We'll argue about it tomorrow. Focus on destroying Apex first. A car was waiting to take Emma to her hotel. As she settled into the back seat and watched the private terminal disappear behind her, she pulled out her phone and found a text from an unknown number. This is Dominic. The gate agent gave me your contact info when arranging the flight. I hope that's okay. Good luck tomorrow. Those families are fortunate to have you fighting for them. DC. Emma stared at the message, a smile pulling at her lips. She saved his number and typed back, "Thank you for everything today. I'll let you know how it goes. EK." His response came immediately. "I know it will go well, but yes, please let me know. I'll be thinking about it. About you." About you. Emma read those 2 words 3 times, her heart beating faster each time. This was ridiculous. She'd just met this man. One flight, even a meaningful one, didn't constitute anything real. But as she put her phone away and stared out at Denver's lights, Emma couldn't stop replaying the conversation. Couldn't stop remembering the way Dominic had listened, really listened, like her words mattered. The way he'd understood without her having to explain. The way he'd looked at her when he asked about dinner, like she was someone worth knowing beyond this one encounter. Focus, she told herself firmly. Tomorrow you have families counting on you. Tomorrow you have to win. But even as she forced her mind to the hearing, to her arguments and evidence and strategy, a small voice whispered that today had changed something. That meeting Dominic Chen wasn't just fortunate timing or airline logistics. It felt like the beginning of something she couldn't quite name yet. Something that would matter. The hearing went exactly as Emma had hoped, and better than she'd dared to expect. By 4 p.m., Apex Industrial's lawyers were scrambling, their carefully constructed defenses crumbling under the weight of evidence Emma had spent 8 months compiling. The internal emails, the suppressed engineering reports, the testimony from 7 families whose children's lead levels had dropped dramatically once Emma secured emergency water filtration systems. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s with 3 decades on the bench, had listened to 6 hours of arguments with an expression that gave nothing away. But when Apex's lead counsel tried to claim the company couldn't be held responsible for a subsidiary's actions despite clear evidence of operational control, Judge Martinez had cut him off mid-sentence. "Counsel, I've read Ms. Kaplan's brief. I've reviewed the discovery materials. Unless you have something new to add beyond creative corporate restructuring, I suggest you move on." Emma had caught the slight emphasis on creative and felt hope bloom in her chest. Now, standing outside the courthouse as March wind whipped down Denver's 16th Street, Emma checked her phone for the 14th time in an hour. 3 messages from her co-counsel celebrating the hearing, 2 from the community organizer in Riverside wanting updates, 1 from her mother asking if she'd eaten, and 1 from Dominic, sent an hour ago. "How did it go? I've been thinking about it all day. About you fighting for those families. DC." Emma smiled and typed back, "Better than I hoped." Judge basically told their lawyers their corporate shell game wasn't going to work. "We won't have a final ruling for a few weeks, but I think we actually have a chance, a real one." His response came within seconds. "I knew you would. Congratulations, Emma. You're doing exactly what you're meant to be doing." Emma, not Ms. Kaplan. The intimacy of her first name sent a small thrill through her. "Thank you. And thank you for yesterday. I honestly don't know if I could have been as focused if I'd, spent the night in Boston worrying about missing the hearing. Then I'm glad the universe overbooked your flight. Are you still free for dinner? Or are you too exhausted? I understand if you need to celebrate with your team instead." Emma paused, her finger hovering over the keyboard. She should celebrate with her team, should debrief with co-counsel, should call the families in Riverside with updates. But something in her wanted to see Dominic again, wanted to continue the conversation they'd started at 30,000 feet. "I'd love dinner. Where and when?" "There's a place called Mercantile. It's in Union Station, farm to table, quiet enough to actually talk. 7 o'clock? I can pick you up from your hotel if you'd like." "I'll meet you there. See you at 7. Emma spent the next 2 hours in her hotel room, trying to convince herself this was just a professional dinner. Just networking. Just 2 people who'd had an interesting conversation and wanted to continue it. But as she changed out of her court suit into dark jeans and a soft gray sweater, as she actually put on makeup for the first time in days, she knew she was lying to herself. This felt like a date, and she wanted it to be. Mercantile was exactly as Dominic had described. Upscale, but not pretentious, with exposed brick walls and Edison bulb lighting. Emma spotted him immediately at a corner table, and her heart did that complicated thing again. He stood as she approached, and she noticed he'd changed. 2 dark jeans, a navy button-down that made his blue eyes even more striking. "You look beautiful," he said, and the directness of it made Emma flush. "Thank you. You look not like a tech CEO." He laughed. "I left the hoodie and slides in San Francisco. Seemed like Colorado required actual effort." They sat, and a server appeared with menus and water. Emma ordered wine. A celebration felt warranted, and Dominic did the same. "Tell me everything," he said once the server left. "I want to hear about the hearing, about the judge's reaction, about how it felt to watch their lawyers realize they couldn't hide." So Emma told him. About Judge Martinez's questions that showed she'd actually read the briefs, not just skimmed them. About the moment when Apex's counsel admitted the parent company had operational input on the subsidiary's discharge procedures, essentially confirming Emma's entire theory of the case. About the community organizer who'd sat in the back row crying quiet tears of relief. Dominic listened with complete attention, asking questions that showed he understood the legal nuances, celebrating the victories, sympathizing with the frustrations. "What happens next?" he asked as their entrees arrived. Emma had ordered trout, Dominic some kind of steak that looked perfectly cooked. Judge Martinez took it under advisement. "We'll get a ruling in 2 to 4 weeks. But based on her questions, her reactions, I think we're going to win. Not just win. I think we might get punitive damages, which would send a message that this kind of corporate behavior has real consequences. And the families would get compensation for medical costs, for property devaluation." "Exactly. It won't undo the harm. But it's accountability. It's justice." Emma paused. "And hopefully it makes the next corporation think twice before prioritizing profit over people's health." Dominic raised his wine glass. "To justice, and to lawyers who fight for it even when it's not profitable." Emma clinked her glass against his. "To billionaires who share their private jets with stranded lawyers." "About that," Dominic said, setting down his glass. "I need to confess something." Emma's stomach flipped. "Okay." "The airline didn't just randomly ask if I'd share the flight. I told them to find someone who needed it. I fly that route twice a month, and the plane's usually empty except for me. It's wasteful. So I asked them to watch for situations where someone got stranded and could use the seat. So it wasn't just coincidence that I ended up on your jet. The coincidence was that it was you, specifically. That you were flying for a case I cared about. That we ended up having a 3-hour conversation that I haven't been able to stop thinking about." He met her eyes. "I've flown 6 other people over the past year. Nice people, grateful people. But I didn't ask any of them to dinner. I didn't spend the entire next day wondering what they were doing, whether their important meeting went well." Emma's heart was racing now. "Why me?" "Because you're brilliant. Because you chose meaning over money and don't regret it. Because when you talk about those families in Riverside, I can see that you don't just represent them. You care about them. You see them as people, not cases." He paused. "And because I've never met anyone who understood what I'm trying to do with my work, who got why I spent 15 years on battery storage when there were easier paths. But you understood in 5 minutes. You saw it." The honesty in his voice made Emma's throat tight. "I did see it. I do see it." "I know this is fast," Dominic continued. "I know we just met yesterday. But I'd like to keep seeing you. I'd like to see where this goes. And I need to know if I'm completely misreading this, because if I am, I'll apologize, and we can just be professional acquaintances who occasionally email about environmental law." Emma laughed, the tension breaking. "You're not misreading it. I haven't been able to stop thinking about you either. About our conversation. About how it felt to be really understood without having to justify my choices. So where does that leave us? Good question. Emma lived in Boston. Dominic lived in San Francisco. They had demanding careers in different cities, different time zones. Every practical consideration argued against pursuing this. But looking at him across the table, at the way he was watching her like she was the most interesting person in the world, Emma found she didn't care about practical considerations. I think it leaves us trying, she said, seeing each other when we can, talking when we can't, figuring out if what we felt on that flight was real or just altitude and adrenaline. It was real, Dominic said quietly. At least for me. For me too. They finished dinner over easy conversation, learning small things about each other, favorite books and childhood pets and college embarrassments, the kind of getting to know you, details that mattered more than they should. When the check came, they did argue about who would pay, but Dominic won by pointing out she'd bought wine at dinner prices, while his plane had cost significantly more. But next time is on me, Emma insisted. Next time, Dominic repeated, smiling. I like that there's going to be a next time. He walked her back to her hotel, even though it was only 3 blocks and Emma insisted she was perfectly capable of walking alone. I know you're capable, he said. But I'm not ready to say goodnight yet. They stopped outside the hotel entrance, downtown Denver's lights reflecting in the windows behind them. When can I see you again? Dominic asked. I'm flying back to Boston tomorrow afternoon, but I have to come back for the ruling in a few weeks. I could come to Boston. I have investors there I should probably visit anyway. You don't have to make up business reasons to visit. I'm not making them up. But even if I was, I'd do it anyway. To see you. Emma felt her resolve crumbling. This man, this brilliant, successful, genuinely good man, wanted to see her, wanted to make the effort despite the distance. I'd like that, she said softly. I'd really like that. Dominic reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was tender, intimate, and Emma's breath caught. Can I kiss you? He asked. Instead of answering, Emma stood on her toes and kissed him first. His arms came around her immediately, pulling her close, and Emma felt something inside her click into place, like a piece of a puzzle she didn't know was missing. The kiss was slow, thorough, perfect. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing harder, Dominic rested his forehead against hers. Definitely real, he murmured. Not altitude or adrenaline. Definitely real, Emma agreed. She went to sleep that night with Dominic's number saved in her phone, with the taste of his kiss still on her lips, with the feeling that her life had just shifted onto a new trajectory. And she wasn't scared. She was ready. 4 years later, Emma stood in the bridal suite at Fairmont, San Francisco, looking at herself in the mirror and barely recognizing the woman staring back. White lace dress that her mother had cried over, hair swept up in an elegant twist, makeup applied by a professional who'd made her look like a bride from a magazine. But it was her expression that surprised her most, the pure, uncomplicated joy. You ready? Her maid of honor asked. Sarah, her best friend from law school, who'd been there through every step of the past 4 years, through the long-distance phase, through the big fight about whether Emma should move to San Francisco or Dominic should move to Boston, through the compromise of both of them moving to Denver, which split the difference and put Emma closer to her environmental cases. I'm ready, Emma said, and meant it. 4 years ago, she'd been a stranded lawyer on an overbooked flight. Now she was, about to marry the man who'd offered her a seat on his jet and ended up offering her his whole heart. It hadn't been easy. Long distance never was. But they'd made it work. Weekend visits that became weekly phone calls that became Emma spending a week in San Francisco, while Dominic showed her his company, his life. Him coming to Boston and sitting in the back of courtrooms, watching her argue cases, looking at her the way he'd looked at her on that first flight. Like she was doing exactly what she was meant to do. The proposal had come 2 years in, on the anniversary of their first flight. Dominic had surprised her with tickets on the same route, the same jet if it was available, the same crew. They'd recreated their first dinner, chicken and wine and conversation about environmental law and corporate responsibility. And then, as they'd crossed into Colorado airspace with the Rockies emerging in the distance, Dominic had pulled out a ring. "I knew after that first flight," he'd said. "Knew you were who I wanted to build a life with. But I wanted to wait until you knew too. Until you were sure." Emma had been crying before he'd even asked the question. "I'm sure. I've been sure for a year. I was just waiting for you to catch up." They'd gotten married exactly where they wanted to, in San Francisco, where Dominic had built his company, with 300 guests that included everyone from tech CEOs to families from Riverside, Colorado, who Emma still represented. Now, standing at the altar with Dominic's hands in hers, Emma listened to him recite the vows he'd written himself. "I knew after 3 hours on a plane that you were extraordinary," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "Knew that your brilliance and your compassion and your absolute refusal to compromise your values were exactly what I'd been looking for, without knowing it. You made me want to be better. Made me want to build something that mattered, not just something that made money. And every day since then, you've shown me what it means to live with purpose, to fight for what's right even when it's hard, to choose meaning over convenience. I promise to spend the rest of my life supporting your work, celebrating your victories, and reminding you on the hard days why what you do matters. I promise to share not just my private jet, but everything I have and am with you. I promise to keep having those 3-hour conversations about environmental law and corporate responsibility until we're both too old to remember what we're arguing about." The crowd laughed, and Emma was crying now, mascara definitely running. When it was her turn, she looked at the man who'd changed her life and spoke from her heart. 4 years ago, I thought I was just catching a flight to Denver. I didn't know I was meeting my future. Didn't know that the man who offered me a window seat was going to offer me the world. You saw me, Dominic. Really saw me. Not just as a lawyer or a crusader, but as a whole person trying to do work that mattered. And you made space for that work in your life without asking me to change or compromise or be smaller. You made me bigger, made me braver, made me believe I could fight for justice and have love at the same time. I promise to keep fighting for the families who need someone in their corner, to keep pushing for a world where corporations can't hide behind legal technicalities when they poison communities. And I promise to build that world with you, as partners, as equals, as people who believe that money and mission aren't contradictory, that you can be successful and good. The officiant pronounced them married, and Dominic kissed her with 300 people cheering, and Emma thought about how none of this would have happened if an airline hadn't overbooked a flight 4 years ago. At the reception, they danced to a song Dominic had chosen, something about unexpected journeys and finding home in unexpected places. Emma's head rested on his shoulder, and she could hear his heartbeat through his tuxedo jacket. "Happy?" he murmured into her hair. "Incredibly." "Good, because I have a surprise." Emma pulled back to look at him. "What kind of surprise?" "Remember how you've been talking about opening a nonprofit focused on environmental justice, training lawyers to take on cases like Riverside?" "Yes. Why?" "I made a donation to get it started. Well, not a donation exactly, more like seed funding, enough to hire 3 staff attorneys and cover operational costs for 2 years. Emma stopped dancing. "Dominic, that's how much?" "Enough. And it's not charity, it's investment, in work that matters, in your vision, in making sure families like the ones in Riverside have someone fighting for them." He smiled. "Consider it a wedding present, to both of us, because I get to spend my life with someone who's changing the world." Emma was crying again, and she didn't care. I love you. So much. I love you too. Have since that first flight. Will for every flight after. 3 years later. The Denver house was chaos, the best kind of chaos. Emma navigated around scattered toys in the hallway, balancing a 7-month-old on her hip, while a 3-year-old clung to her leg, and a 4-year-old shrieked with laughter from the living room where Dominic was apparently losing a battle with a toy dump truck. "Daddy's truck is stuck," shouted Mason, their oldest, with the kind of glee only a 4-year-old can muster at someone else's misfortune. "I can see that," Emma called back, adjusting baby Lily on her hip. "Maybe use your engineering skills, Mr. Tech CEO." "My engineering skills are for battery storage, not toy vehicle extraction," Dominic shouted back. "Different skill set." Their middle child, Sophie, detached from Emma's leg and ran to help, her tiny footsteps thundering across the hardwood floor. Emma smiled, feeling the weight of complete exhaustion and complete happiness in equal measure. The nonprofit had launched 3 years ago and was already handling 12 major environmental justice cases across 6 states. Emma ran it from Denver, traveling when needed, but mostly building a team of brilliant young lawyers who shared her passion for holding corporations accountable. Dominic had expanded Helix Solutions into community-scale renewable energy, focusing on the same kinds of towns he'd grown up in. They'd placed battery storage systems in 15 communities so far, creating jobs and clean energy in places that had been overlooked by bigger companies. And somehow, in the middle of building these empires of purpose, they'd also built a family. Mason had been born the year after they got married, unplanned, but immediately beloved. Sophie followed 14 months later, and Lily had arrived 7 months ago, completing their family in ways Emma hadn't known she needed. "You know what today is?" Dominic asked later that evening after all 3 kids were finally miraculously asleep. They sat on the back porch of their Denver home, the Rockies visible in the distance, glasses of wine in hand and baby monitor crackling softly beside them. "Wednesday?" Emma guessed. "Or possibly Thursday. I've lost track." 7 years since our first flight. Emma turned to look at him, surprised. "You remembered the date?" "I remember everything about that day. Remember you standing in the private terminal looking exhausted and professional and slightly outraged that you had to accept help. Remember the first time you smiled, when I said I hoped you'd destroy Apex. Remember thinking, oh, there she is, the person I've been waiting for." Emma leaned against his shoulder, comfortable in a way that came from 7 years of learning each other's rhythms. "I thought you were going to be horrible," she admitted. "Some entitled billionaire who was doing a charity case and expecting gratitude. Instead, I was a regular billionaire doing a charity case and genuinely interested in, environmental law. You were a man who saw me, who understood why the work mattered, who made space for it instead of asking me to choose between career and relationship. You did the same for me. Made space for Helix without asking me to compromise the mission for profit. Believed in community-scale deployment when every investor said to focus on industrial applications because that's where the margins were." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the last light fade from the sky. "Do you ever regret it?" Emma asked quietly. "The choice we made? Living here instead of San Francisco? Focusing on mission over maximum growth?" "Never. Not once." Dominic turned to face her, his expression serious. "Emma, we have 3 kids who will grow up knowing their parents chose meaning over money, who will see what it looks like to build companies that serve communities instead of extracting from them, who will understand that love and work and purpose can all exist together. That's worth more than any valuation." Even when Mason's truck is stuck and Sophie's refusing to sleep and Lily's been crying for 3 hours straight. Especially then. Because all of that, the chaos and exhaustion and joy, it's real. It's what matters. And I get to share it with you. Emma kissed him. tasting wine and 7 years of partnership and the promise of more to come. "I'm glad you shared your jet with a stranded lawyer," she murmured. "I'm glad that stranded lawyer said yes to dinner, and to dating, and to moving to Denver, and to building this whole chaotic, beautiful life together." The baby monitor crackled, and Lily's cry pierced the evening quiet. "My turn," Dominic said, standing. "You got the last 3 wake-ups. We'll count it as 2 since the second one was only 5 minutes. Deal. But I'm still taking this one." Emma watched him disappear into the house, listened to his voice through the monitor soothing their daughter, and thought about the path that led here. From an overbooked flight to a shared jet, to a 3-hour conversation that changed everything. From Denver to Boston to San Francisco and back to Denver. From strangers to partners to parents. From 2 people doing good work separately to 2 people building a better world together. 7 years ago, she'd been a lawyer trying to catch a flight. Now she was a mother, a nonprofit founder, a wife, a woman who'd built exactly the life she wanted with exactly the person she wanted to build it with. And it all started because someone treated her like a princess when she expected to be treated like an imposition. Sometimes, Emma thought as she stood and headed inside to help with the baby, the universe knows exactly what it's doing, even when it overbooks your flight. If this story moved you, remember, the best partnerships start with respect, not romance. The best love stories take years to build, not days. Share this with someone who needs to hear that being treated well isn't, say, extraordinary, it's the minimum, and anything less isn't worth your time. That marriage and kids and career can coexist when you choose a partner who sees your work as essential, not optional. That moving to a new city for love isn't weakness when the person you're moving toward makes space for everything you are. And that sometimes a diverted flight, an unexpected kindness, and 4 years of building friendship into foundation becomes a lifetime of 3 kids, shared mission, and partnership. That changes not just 2 lives, but the communities they serve. Subscribe if you believe in billionaires who use their resources to serve rather than extract, in lawyers who fight for justice even when it's not profitable, in 7-year journeys from strangers to soulmates, and in the radical idea that you can have it all, love, work, purpose, family, when you choose someone who wants you to. Because sometimes all it takes is one shared flight, one person who sees you clearly, and the patience to build something real instead of rushing something temporary.